In React, the state is mutable data structure specific to a component that holds and manages information or data. There are several ways to manage the state. Local state with useState. This is the most common and straightforward method for handling state. Start by importing the useState hook and lay it at the top level of your component. By the way, it's one of the hook's rules. The rest of rules you can find on this page. The useState hook takes initial value for the state variable. In our case, it's 0, but it can be any JavaScript data type. It returns an array with two elements, the current state value and a setter function to update the state. By calling the setter function with a new value, you can update the state, leading to a re-render of the component. If you run the setter function a few times with the same result, React batches state updates for better performance. If you want to update the same state multiple times before the next render, you can pass a function that updates the next state based on the previous one in the queue. Use useState for a simple local state that doesn't need to be shared between components. When your component state has complex interactions or transitions, it's better to use useReducer. It's alternative to useState. useReducer accepts three parameters: a reducer function, initial arguments, and optional initializer function. The reducer function is mandatory parameter. It's pure function that takes two arguments, the current state and action object. The initial arguments are the second parameter to useReducer, and they represent the initial state of the component. The initializer function is optional third parameter. If provided, it allows you to set up the initial state more dynamically based on the initial arguments passed. If the initializer function is not provided, the initial state will be equal to the initial arguments directly. The hook returns an array with the current state and a dispatch function to update the state. Dispatch function can be located outside of the component or even in another folder, which allows to isolate the logic in a separate file. The dispatch function takes the current state and action object as arguments and returns state. It can be new, previous, or the same state. Sharing logic between components using useReducer is not possible without passing values as props or using useContext. Use useReducer when your component state interactions are more complex and involve different actions. useContext is a way to manage state globally. To use it, create a new context with React.js. Wrap the component tree needing access to the context data with the provider component, passing the value prop. The value is our store. In components that require the context data, use useContext hook with the context object as argument. The argument to useContext must be the context object itself. If you need to change your state, you need to use useContext with useState. As you can see now, we are able to increase our value, not just read. You can use useDispatch depending on the task, which can help you to isolate your complex or simple logic. The functionality is the same, but now we use dispatch function to increase our value. Use useContext when you need to access data that is shared across multiple components and providing through a React context. It can be beneficial for global application state, them or styling configuration, localization, and user authentication state. Today we have two tasks to solve. The first one involves changing the background color of our page. So let's start solving the first task. To achieve this, we'll use useState as suggested, but I would also like to implement React context. So let's import useContext and create context. Step 1 is written on text with initial empty value, so let's do it. Let's add them on text with result of add on text. Next we'll add a them provider component that will provide them information to its children. Inside this component we'll use useState with default value and set up a value and setter function. In our case, false represents the light them and true represents the dark them. isDarkMode is our value, setIsDarkMode is our setter function. We should also add a separate function toggle them to handle them changes. We'll reuse the setter function and update the value based on its previous state. To complete this component, we'll return a provider as a wrapper around our children. Let's write here children and pass the isDarkMode variable and toggle them function to its children. Our provider is ready. The next step is to reuse isDarkMode and set isDarkMode inside our main component. We will use useContext with them_onTest as a parameter. This helps us to access isDarkMode and toggle them variables when we wrap our component with them provider. We will introduce a simple variable them, which returns dark or light based on the current them. Now let's add a last name to the component. This variable will be used as a last name and as a text on the page, and see if it works. As you can see, the background and text change when we switch in thems. By the way, the appropriate last names have already been added. The final step is to add the toggle them function to our button. Let's check one more time and it works. It doesn't look like on the design, but instead of focusing on the UI, the main idea is to learn how to use state in React. For our second task, we will randomly select a travel destination. So which country do you want to go? Let's find out. To achieve this, we already have all the necessary data for different countries. All we need to do is import this data, import useState and create a small additional function getRandomNumber, which will return a random number between 0 and the maximum number of entries in our data. MathRandom used with MathFlow and be used to return random integers. Our function for getting a random number between 0 and maximum number of entries is ready. The next step is to add useState with two variables, index and setIndex, where the default value is the result of getRandomNumber. Since we have all the HTML elements for our component, let's fill them with real data. We'll start with flag, name, capital, languages, population, and currency. Let's add our flag to our image. Unfortunately, the flag value is not available at the moment, so we won't be able to display it. Instead of it, we'll have a placeholder. Let's remove some extra symbols, and now we have a placeholder. The next one is to add alt to our image for better accessibility. Next one is to add name of the entry. Also let's add capital, languages using toString, because we have array and we need to present it as a string, population and currency. So let's finish adding our information and refresh page a few times, just to check if everything works. Now let's add setter function with getRandomNumber to the button. When we click the select entry, a new random number will be generated. Everything works. The task is now completed. Now let's click the button and see which entry I will visit. Oh, great, I have never been in Andorra. I will record a new video when I visit that country. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Bye.